I call this episode Farm Gate because I imagine gates, like locked gates behind which my relative was trapped. My Australian relative who thought he was so savvy and getting a free, you didn't have to buy the ticket to come to Canada, his mom's homeland. He had a job as soon as he got here with room and board. And yet here he was in Canada, in Alberta, in a compound, a locked compound, working in a slaughterhouse. He hated the room and board. He was traumatized by the work, and he couldn't get out. It took my family a lot of effort to extricate him from this situation. It was a farm gate. And another trap, can be those of farmers and the implications of how little a profit margin they currently are managing to feed us within. But on the other hand, the joy I found in being a farmhand for a day in a well-run, respectful workplace with the satisfying work of doing a good job and really caring for the land, caring for being cared for as a worker, and caring for our customers. It was so good. It's such a part of the life I want to support in this country. And yet, this country is way behind most countries when it comes to investing in agriculture as a cornerstone of our way of life and our economy. Back in the 80s, I was living in Switzerland, and a friend who's a farmer, his family's farm had been in the family for many, many, many hundreds of years, many generations. And every generation had simply improved their process, their management of land, and it was so valued there in Switzerland. I mean, it's a mountainous country. It's challenging to grow food on a mountain. It is. But that's where tax dollars went, because that was seen as absolutely essential for the country to be resilient and autonomous and able to withstand what life will throw us. I think we need more of that right now in Canada. And I'm going to get into those weeds. Something different, this way comes something different, something different, something different, this way comes something different, something different. I'm Heather McLeod. Something Different This Way Comes is my passion project, a one-woman show, and I'm so glad you're listening. I am a locavore. I not only try to eat mostly things that grow where I live, but I grew much of what I ate for over 20 years. I am an award-winning journalist. I worked at CBC Radio for a long time. And more recently, I've become a certified financial planner. In fact, I'm more than a decade into that career, which gives me real context. I got into it because I wanted to get it right, the money thing, Make sure I'd be okay and my family would be okay. And boy, have I ever learned a lot along the way that I want to share with you here. Thanks for listening. Something different, this way comes something different, something different, something different, this way comes something different, something different. Okay, 3 stories for you. And the first one kind of starts over here. Back behind me is a picture taken, an aerial picture, of the farm where my mom mostly grew up. And if you notice, there's 2 houses there in the corner because this farm was owned by my mom's dad and his brother. So she grew up really close to her cousins that lived right next door, kind of isolated in the middle of this, several thousand acre farm, dairy farm with growing the winter grains as well. And growing a lot of the fruit and vegetables they ate too. If you can see the size of the veggie gardens behind the houses, they are not inconsiderable. And there's chicken coops too. Any rate, that was where my mom grew up, close to her cousin. I went back to Alberta often when I had new albums out back in the 90s. And I was visiting with my mom's cousin, Betty, who's still like her closest friend. And I met Betty's nephew from Australia because her sister had immigrated to Australia years before and her son had grown up there. I mean, he's still Canadian. His mom's Canadian. But he'd never much been to Canada. In fact, this was the first time I'd ever met him. And oh my God, the story. So instead of deciding to visit Canada as a young man, he was maybe even a teenager, early 20s, quite young. Instead of doing it with the help of his family, he thought he had a great idea. He'd seen an ad or been given a flyer to come to Canada, guaranteed job, all of your travel costs covered, your room and board will be taken care of once you get here. So that is how he came. And the first that Betty and her husband Tim heard about it was him pleading for help because he'd ended up working in an enclosed compound in rural Alberta in a slaughterhouse. He hated the work. He thought the room and board that was provided was not only terrible, but terribly expensive because what he was getting paid, most of it went to it, and paying off the cost of flying him there was going to take forever. And he hated being there for another second longer. But getting him out of that, even though he was a Canadian, and then even though he thought he understood what he was in for, ended up being this adventure, this misadventure, this process that blew my mind. Blew my mind. And do I think this kind of thing has only happened in a little blip of time? My whatever my mom's cousin's nephew is to me. But when he was here, frankly, I don't. I think of during COVID, some of the stories coming forward of people in Canada to accept farm-based jobs that were really suffering from COVID because they didn't have appropriate supports. And other things that occasionally drift into my attention. As a member of the National Farmers Union, I maybe get more of an intel on that over the last 10 or 15 years or so, but still, that was my firsthand experience of the insecurity of being a farm worker in Canada and some of the shit that's going on. Second story. Way better story. So this year, for the first time, I became a member of the Community Shares Agriculture run by Sleepy G Farm. Now, I've been friends with the owners of Sleepy G Farm since before they actually bought that property and started building up that farm. Huge fans of them. But because I was growing my own food, I would just be an occasional customer. My carrot crop didn't come out through one year, and so I bought all my carrots from them and various things that they just do so well, and I was always so daunted by them. But now I don't have a garden this year, so I got a share, and I've been loving what they produce, and they throw a bit of a potluck for us all to meet one another and see the farm in action. I'd always gone, even when I wasn't a member, not always, whenever I could, many years. This year I got to go as a member and enjoyed it as always. And then they invited me to stick around and stay the night in their bunkhouse so we could catch up. And then they mentioned that they were short not one but two workers that week on the farm. If I wanted to stick around for a day and help out, they would pay me. And I could. I only had one work call that day, and I did it. I took that hour off. They accommodated that, no problem. So 8 o'clock, I'm out in the field with Marcel, one of the farmers, and one of the other farm workers, and we're harvesting spinach and then harvesting lettuce. Very carefully, leaving the stuff that has started to bolt because it's just going to get folded back into the soil and rejuvenate and feed that soil. Leaving a skirt at the base of each plant, not pulling it out whole so it can grow another harvest or at least continue to capture all the goodness in the air and the sun and give it to the soil when it's turned over later on. We harvested a lot, just each with a steak knife and a bin. It's hand harvested. I think the first boxes of spinach were 7 to 9 kilos a box because we very gently laid them in there. We don't want to bruise or crimp any leaf at all, and it's a pretty curled up kind of crop. It needs some space. When we came back for lettuce, the lettuce we could packed itself in much more densely without hurting the leaves, and we were harvesting twice as many boxes. Each of them was, I think they went from 9 up to like 15 kilos, the same volume of box. And we did twice as many boxes. So a lot of food was brought in off literally just one bed, which is, I think, a third or a quarter of an acre. And this is a 10-acre, well, not farm, the farm is bigger, but 10 acres. That's the compound fenced against the animals in which most of the food is grown. So the minute we had one of those crops ready to go, we boogied back over to the packing house where another group of farm workers quickly rinsed it clean and then spun it dry and then packaged it up and got it into cold storage as fast as possible so it would keep for a week or more until it could get in the hands of us shareholders. There's like 300 families and also local grocery stores. They mentioned they do not sell to institutions. They would be happy to, but every institution that they've approached or who has approached them requires them to invest in infrastructure that not only washes and dries and packages up food, but peels it, cuts it, blanches it, so it's pre-cooked really, packages it in the kind of package that can be sort of thrown without unwrapping it into boiling water or whatever. They have very specific requirements of the kind of stage of food prep that fits their kitchens, which I thought was really interesting, right? It's another example of, to me, large corporations kind of imposing on their buyers and sellers a lot of the heavy lifting, while they get to keep the profits by therefore being able to meet many, many people with exactly the same product. But that's a bit of an aside. So I spent this day being a farm worker. I was in the field early with the spinach and the lettuce. There were other farm workers. They did other things, and they continued on gathering up food according to this plan that the farmer had put together. In fact, we ducked out after having dinner together, me to write my newsletter and her to go over her survey of what was at what stage in each field and decide who she was going to assign to do what over the coming week and what her goals were for what we would have for products to sell and what her goals were for buyers to contact and what to promise them. Whoa, right? Major strategizing at work. She did it in like an hour, and then we came back and had dinner together. And then she presented that to each of the workers so they could go and run with it as the day went on. The other thing that really struck my attention were two things. One was how long we took for lunch. We had a busy day. Things were wilting as we spoke. We had to take some measures to keep things fresh while we took a break to eat. But the break was a fulsome one. We were chatty. We shared the meal. Well, we each brought our own meals, but we shared the table and conversation. It was really lovely. I've been working in spaces with lunchrooms for ages. I don't get that kind of conversation. It was lovely. And part of the conversation was about how that work plan made room to have a bunch of the workers take a half day or a whole day off to celebrate a birthday. And moreover, how the farmer was going to make sure that they got to town on that birthday and they had the kind of day they wanted to have, including treating them to a restaurant meal, right? It was a really good place to work. And then on the other part of my brain, I'm looking at what the current hourly wage is for a worker, right? How many people are working here? There were 8 of us, and they were down 1, and 2 of them were the farmers, not getting paid an hourly wage, just trying to get by on whatever they profit once they've paid everybody and all other expenses. And I just can't see how this is adding up to what I'm used to paying for groceries at the grocery store. I know my community share charges me a lot less for all the food I get than I would have paid had I bought it as I needed it at the grocery store. I've done that math. I am absolutely confident I am getting a very good deal. And yet, even if I were paying for the food what it can get directly at a grocery store, this is a tight operation. This is a tight operation. Really made me think. Really made me think. My third story goes back in time again to when I was a teenager, back in the 80s. I got to live in Switzerland for several months on an exchange to improve my French. And among my friends was, 18th generation farmer. I mean, his family had farmed in Switzerland for way, way back, like literally to the Middle Ages. And he lived on this farm, and we had to, whenever we had a late night, which we liked to do, we called them a nuit blanche, a white night, when we stayed up all night. The night would end, though, at around 4 o'clock, so we could jump on the train and walk up to his farm and get him there in time for his morning chores, because that was essential. There were quite a few people working on this farm, and compared to this farm, it was tiny. Like, Maybe it was 10 acres, and this one's thousands of acres. And there were a lot of people working there. There were also a lot of things happening there. There were cows, and there were goats, there were chickens, and there was berries, there were root vegetables, there were soft vegetables, there was so many things. And every day that farmer too would have jobs everybody had to do. And the deadline was that they had to pack up the delivery truck to bring it to the local grocery store before the grocery store opened every single morning of the year. And in Switzerland, they were compensated for producing local food that was locally available. And the buyers of that food benefited because it was guaranteed to be cheaper than anything imported. So it was the first thing to sell. And it was the freshest thing to buy. And it created this enormous sense of pride and also understanding of the seasons in the people of that town, because they didn't have the same things to sell every day. They always had some things: milk, eggs, cream, cheese. But they didn't always have spinach, lettuce. That stuck with me so hard. That idea of taking our tax dollars to build food security in a place like Switzerland, right? Which is mountains, man. The places where those farms can be built are finite. The depths of the valley tends to flood and have a lot of shadow. You need to be up a bit to get the light. You need to do a lot of work on your field in order for it to be, flat enough to hold the water and to deepen the soil. And that's reason why generations would build up a farm. And there's good reason why generations would value that farm. But I don't see that understanding of the value of farmland back home in Canada. I really don't. Even though this farm, which hasn't been in my family, since I was in elementary school. Yeah. It's still a farm, though. I went back and visited it. We took a picture of this tree. You see here? That tree I used to play under when we lived on that farm when I was little. It was my tree fort. And those two bushes, there's a double row, and there was a little area in between where us toddlers could also play. It's outside the shot over here, but you could see it from every corner of that giant farm. So those are the stories I want to give context to. What is going on here? I've told you before, let's give this some context, all three of these stories. I've told you before how, according to the National Farmers Union, which surveys everybody in the business of farming across Canada, keeps careful track, only 5% of farm operations in Canada qualify for traditional funding, which means they're considered to be profitable. They're considered to be profitable. Now, I think anybody who's feeding me is profiting me, honestly. But the other 95% are still managing to run a business. They're just not generating enough net profit to both pay for all their expenses, including paying down their debt, and stash enough cash to retire, or sell it to somebody who will pay them enough to finance their retirement, or some combination thereof. And if that's the case, along the way, they're not eligible for some cheap ways to borrow money or some grants that are sent to investment-ready companies that meet that qualification of profitability. In this case, therefore, who is making the money, who's first in line to get a profit, are a much smaller group of companies that have figured out how to get the food from the field to the plate. They're the middlemen. They get to carry the profit first, which means in order to be profitable, they try to increase how much we as customers are willing to pay to get that food on our plate. And they try to decrease how much it costs them to buy that food. I talked already about buying things when everybody else has a harvest, when everybody has pumpkins, right? Then you can drive down the price because, you can't buy all the pumpkins, so you'll buy the ones at the cheapest price. And then if you can store those pumpkins and sell them the next year, just before the local ones are ripe, you can get a great price for them and show a great profit. Even if some of them rot along the way, you get what I'm saying. So the same thing is true. If everybody's got pumpkins at the same time, and some of them paid their workers more and gave their workers a great place to live and made sure that they had time off and made sure they could afford to feed their families or whatever, right? Helped out with the cost of them traveling here if they are coming to Canada to do the work. If that one's got higher expenses than the one next to them, who's not being as good a doobie, there's a pressure to be not as good a doobie. There really is. In order to sell the work the product that you have at all. I think that's part of what's going on. What's also going on, though, is that Canada has decided not to spend tax dollars on farming infrastructure. It's trusting this market to take care of it for us. There are some exceptions. We've built policies and laws over the years that can be very helpful. One of them is co-ops. A co-op is a member-owned enterprise. So if it's a housing co-op, the tenants technically own the buildings that they are renting, and they get together to decide what the rent should be, what money they should spend on maintenance, what the costs are. And in the initial phase of building or buying that infrastructure, the way Canada's cooked it into our system right now is they can only borrow it from the government. And the government gets the money back with interest, but they guarantee it so that that interest is comparable to what an average house owner with a great and steady job might get charged, as opposed to what would be available if the bank were looking at a group of people that just happen to be tenants and want to buy their building. They'd be like, you don't tick any of my risk boxes, and so I'm going to charge you out the wazoo if I will loan to you at all, right? The government filled that bridge, and then the government stopped filling that bridge. Even though it costs us nothing, we get the money back with interest. They stopped funding co-ops, and they just put their toe back in last, it's been about 5-6 years, and made a little bit of money available, which was people were poised to take the most of. So things have been done with that and proven that it's a great idea. But they're still so in love with their buddies that have big, successful businesses that look like investment-ready, easy, low-risk options, especially when we have a banker at the head of it all, that they're not sure they want to keep doing it again. You can tell which way I'm leaning. I'll get to opportunities, but that is one of the things going on here. And in Thunder Bay, we do have a farmers co-op, which is owned by farmers in order to buy at the lowest possible price the tools and infrastructure that they need, infrastructure elements that they need. It's been running for ages. There are other co-ops out there taking advantage of Canada's great co-op policies that don't require a big input of capital. But right now, the cost of land is going up. And one of the reasons the cost of land is going up is because we don't protect farmland. Unlike most countries, we don't have a special category of land that has been built up to be viable farmland to save it from being turned into something else. And so if you have a farmer who's been managing to pay their workers and build up their soil and meet their customers' needs throughout their working life, and now it's time for them to retire, they can't afford to. There's not enough profit shown by that business to pay off the cost of buying that business by another farmer. Nobody will okay the deal. And if you did, it might break you in order to pay enough to allow that farmer to build their own little house somewhere or, move and live around in an RV or whatever their plans are. You still need to replace income for the rest of their life, and there's not the asset in there. So instead, the person who sees that land as being a bargain that they can do great things with is not actually going to farm it. They're going to turn it into a whole bunch of residences, maybe, or plop a factory on it or whatever. The farm soil that's so precious will be lost as soil. Canada is not doing any of this right now. And we really, 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 really need to. The cost is huge of not doing so. The closest we come is investors that will go and lend money, like buy farmland from a farmer and rent it back to them to continue farming and say, well, if ever you get enough cash, you can always buy it back from me, but I'm going to keep upping the price based on the going rate for land. So, of course, that never happens, right? It's the same Faustian bargain, just a little bit different due date, honestly. What else is going on here is this whole idea of profitability, right? Honestly, in our hearts, none of us, very few of us, get profitability. What it looks like when it works for year after year is something like the landed gentry, right? They owned land, and they kind of owned everybody who lived on that land. They got to set the deal. And net, at the end of the day, all the work that was done ended up paying them a net profit that they could live off of. Even if they mostly lived in town, they certainly didn't do the actual hands-on work. They might do some decision making. What are we going to spend these profits on? Should we improve the housing here, or should we give me a bonus so I can go to Italy for the summer? That kind of decision making. They managed to keep that structure working for generation after generation only by concentrating the ownership, not just in a family, but really just in one person in each generation. And when that got challenged after the Second World War, kind of after the First World War, what we shifted to, what had sprung up in the 19th century, which is manufacturing-based monopolies, where somebody has enough cash to build the mill, right, and pay the people to build the mill, and then pay the people to run the mill, pay the people to figure out how to sell the mill, the product of the mill, and such that they've gotten back their investment on the profit alone within 5 to 10 years. And from then on, as long as that mill keeps on producing whatever it produces, they just live off that income, right? So the stock market is representing all the companies that have figured out how to get from that value, we call it. We're big enough to invest in. I can see this is going to work. The profits are clear. That value point of investment. Growing up, your market gets bigger. You might diversify what you do. You might buy the people that supply you or the people that buy what you have and make a profit there by taking over those elements. And then you kind of find a level, we call those growth. No, that was growth, and then this is value. So it's a growth is when it's starting up, and then there's a value company. And when we have a value company, let's call it Amazon, it feels like it's going to last forever. But in fact, unlike the multi-generation of land-based gentry, most corporations have a lifespan of a few decades, right? The railroad barons of the late 19th century kind of fizzled out when the car came along. Ma Bell had a monopoly that government finally, after a lot of pressure from citizens, dismantled, and it lost a lot of value. I think the Musk empire is also likely to suffer the same thing, right? So we have this saying in managing people's investments that past returns are no promise of future returns. They can't predict it. And people listen and nod, but they don't believe you. They look at the last quarter, the last 5 years, the headlines they keep reading, and we believe in forever because it's easier. But actually, the evidence is it's a passing profit. And what happens is what makes that, you get pennies off every deal and you're having billions of deals, so you're making a lot of money. You lose pennies off every deal and you collapse fast, right? It's actually more fragile than it looks. Whereas farms, once you build up the land, once you figure out how to feed the people where you live, they can keep on giving forever and ever and ever and ever if we take care of them and we consider them to be a cornerstone of our economy. We need to change the lens through which we are valuing our farms. And talking to the winners, the ones who have investment-ready farming or adjacent to farming businesses, they're the ones who loan money to farms. They're the ones who buy off farmers, and so they have all these stats on exactly what's going on in the world of agriculture. Those winners, those profitable, large organizations tend to be the one who get the ear of decision makers. There are people representing the other majority, vast majority, like the National Farmers Union, but they need people like us speaking to I'm jumping ahead of myself, aren't I? All right, I will get to what you could do about all this in just a minute. Something different, this way comes something. Something different, something different. Something different, this way comes something. Something different, something different. obviously, talk about it. Talk about it. Use your voice. If you take a picture and put it on social media because this is making you think about what you're seeing, do that. Better yet, send an email or stop in the grocery store your MP, because right now, until September 1st, the federal government is got a call for input out on the next federal budget. And all those MPs will be part of that conversation. Also maybe write a letter directly to the Minister of Finance. That would be great. And I'll put in my notes, there's some resources out there, organizations that put together templates saying, listen, please say this. This would be so helpful to amplify. If you agree with us, amplify your voice, use the same wording, and maybe they'll start to hear what we have to say. That would be powerful, powerful. And also talk about co-ops. Look around. Is there a credit union in your neighborhood? That's a co-op. Is there a co-op grocery store? That's a co-op. A co-op farm equipment place? Is there a co-op housing in your area? If you join the waiting list, I just recently joined the waiting list for Castle Green where I used to live, and I was told it might be 10 years before I get a spot because they have twice as many people on that waiting list as there are room for people to currently live there. Well, if that wasn't an argument for the need for more co-ops in my neighborhood, I don't know what is. And I've just found myself access to everybody else on the waiting list who might be interested in thinking about what else we could turn into a co-op and what that co-op should do here where we live. Co-ops are great. Also talk to your federal representative about why we should fund the ones that need capital. The fact that we're not funding it is just stupid, and we should fix that. Should be an easy fix. They're throwing money all over the place. Let's fund local solutions. Also, fund agriculture. Think about what is really valuable in Canada. What do you think you'd like to see your tax dollars behind, and why? I think right now, a lot of what we grow, we sell to middlemen who sell it out of country, who manufacture something there to bring it back here. There's a lot of cross-border. There's a lot of risk now that we're in a tariff generation in the current structure. So there's a lot of opportunity to build up our capacity to meet all of those steps right here within Canada. But they're startups. They need money. Is that an aspect of our economy that you think tax dollars should go towards, and maybe taxpayers should become owners of? Raise your voice. Put your imagination into it. I think that's a really powerful way to be a part of fixing these many problems. Most of all, though, I would say, we need to ask our representatives to talk not just to us with whatever impression we've managed to put together from our perspective, but to the farmers that are not profitable. What would make them stay in the game? What would make them encourage other people to take up farming? What do we need to address so we stop losing farmers, start gaining farmers, right? Because right now we're losing farmland and farmers. What would it take to fix that? They know better than me, and our representatives should be talking to them and their representatives. Like the National Farmers Union, absolutely. There are other organizations out there. They would all love to be listened to more closely with more respect, because failing to be profitable is not failing to meet our needs. I just have to say that. But what can you do personally besides talking to somebody and flexing your I am a citizen and a democracy muscles? What can you do? Buy local. Buy local. If you see something in the grocery store and it's got a local farm on it instead of one from somewhere else, see if you can't buy that one. It's going to be fresher, but also it's better for your soul. And it's building up your local economy in a really powerful way. So if you're deciding between 3 lattes a week and 1 latte a week, and I can afford to buy those delicious carrots from the local farm instead of the less delicious ones that are cheaper, buy local. Buy local. Absolutely buy local, and tell people why you're buying local. Or grow local. Grow your own food in order to really understand what you are paying for when you buy food. growing food is a great lesson. It also can be really meditative and deeply frustrating. So it's great to do it with somebody. Maybe you know somebody with a veggie garden and you could say, listen, I've decided my goal this growing season is to actually help someone grow food for a day or two or an hour or two. Can I help you with something? And maybe you'll learn the joys of turning a compost. I don't know, weeding a garden, or rushing through the collection of a harvest so that it's packaged and put safe away before it wilts. I don't know. But I think that's a really powerful way to explore this opportunity for doing things better, shifting our culture, shifting our understanding to be more rooted in what really is valuable to us. And that's my third one. It's really about planning. I mean, if you see yourself in that farmer who has worked hard and done an amazing job for their entire working life and now is thinking, oh my gosh, I can't just get my kid to buy me out of the farm and take the money therein to finance a nice, comfortable retirement that looks a lot like the one my parents enjoyed and my grandparents enjoyed. The money's just not adding up. Do not despair. Get creative. Give yourself the time to think about, what do you really, really want? What are the rankings of your desires? If you let go of, I always assumed it would go this way, and dig down to the specifics, do you want company more than you want space, right? Would you like to live in community with a bit of privacy? Would that be more attractive to you maybe than a house that might become isolated because it's hard to get out of it when your capacities change? Do you like security more than possessions? What does security look to you? Like, do you want to make sure that you can afford to heat and cool your home and buy the food that you want? Is that more important than having all the possessions you've acquired over the years? Are you willing to kind of trade that up, right? Do you want value convenience over predictability? Are you willing to kind of have somebody else cook most meals for you that has figured out how to do that with local food or affordable food or a variety of cultures represented in a place, eating communally, because that's going to be cheaper and easier and more convenient to you than figuring out how to keep eating the food that you have eaten your entire life, now that the cost of some of those elements make them out of your reach. I don't know what's going to work for you, but I do know that giving yourself permission to dream before you're panicking, just dream and investigate, what are my priorities? And then kick those ideas around with people you like and trust. Innovations can spring out of that I can't give you as a shopping list. It's got to come from your heart. But your heart's a mighty beast, and so's your brain, and so's your social capital. I mean, we can act in response to what's being handed to us and what we expected to come, but that's a much narrower path than daring to give ourselves time to proactively build alternatives, even if it's only in our mind. It can open doors. Something Different This Way Comes is a production, I guess, of Heather McLeod Wealth, which you can find online at heathermcleodwealth.ca to find out what I do, and to book a free one-on-one half-hour chat if you'd like. You can also visit the website somethingdifferentthiswaycomes.ca. That's where you'll get all my show notes, and you can sign up for the weekly newsletter, which is mostly about this podcast. You can also find my GoFundMe. This is a totally 100% independent show. It's a one-woman show. And I really, really appreciate any gifts that you send me through GoFundMe. I'm also open to sponsorship. If you think you have something I should talk about, let me know. You can email somethingdifferentthiswaycomes@proton.me. Happy to chat, but especially happy if you're emailing me with your own story and perspective that I can include on this show, or to book time to chat about that. Finally, if you want to help this podcast find its audience, I'd so appreciate your help. You can recommend it to a friend. That's really powerful. Give it a great review wherever you found it. Subscribe, like, all so appreciated. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week. Something different, this way comes something. Something different, something different, something different, this way comes something. Something different, something different. We're not done quite yet. I have a bonus for you today. I had a listener give me some feedback, and it was actually a conversation, and such an honor, such an honor. So I love making this podcast into a conversation, and I so thank her for chatting with me. What she said was, I was inspired to think about what I'd like to see happen in my small town. Right now, people are deciding to run for election in our municipal government, and people that have done it before are rerunning, and the election's coming up pretty fast. So I went and talked to one of them. I know them. It's a small town. I know them a bit. And I feel like I made a mistake. So I broached the conversation, and then they got really excited telling me about tiny homes and how they were excited to make that something that they could make their legacy in this town. And I countered, because I don't think that's the place to start. And I told them what I think is why that's not the best place to start. And the conversation kind of fizzled, and I don't know if I can build on it going forward, whether or not she gets elected. What would you do? Okay, well, I am no expert, and I wasn't part of that conversation, but thoughts came to mind, mostly inspired by Katherine Hayhoe, who wrote a book that I loaned out and I haven't yet gotten back. Darren, I'm talking to you. I would love to get that book back. But anyway, you can look it up. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And she was very scientific and pragmatic in her early work in trying to help the world figure out what good looks like. And what she came to decide was the science, the facts, the reasons why were not the real challenge. What had to be learned and mastered was managing conversations and storytelling. And so she put her scientific, pragmatic mind to what works and what doesn't and why. And so what she came up with, for me to paraphrase, is you need to build on commonalities. So when you engage with somebody that you hope to build an allyship with, if right off the hop you realize that they are not open to listening at all, they don't want to get to know you, decamp. That's not worth your time. But that's actually the loudest group and the smallest group. The vast majority of us, good hearts, good minds, good intentions. If you listen, you will hear where things you have are in common. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I'm really worried about housing, affordable housing in our community, and I love the idea of tiny homes. You ask them why. What do you love about it? And then you ask them more why. Where do you think it should happen? Like here, what are your thoughts on where it should be built? And who do you think might live there? And how long might they live there? And how would it be helpful, the best choice for them? And listen for things you agree with. Listen for things you agree with. That's the first. A lot of listening. So that when you've identified some commonalities, you can first offer to support what they want to do that you also want to see done. Build an allyship with positive reinforcement. I want to see, here's an idea to add to that, or whatever you might have, right? I agree with you that that's so important. And once you've offered them some support, only then can you ask for them to support what you're thinking that they didn't raise. And you can frame it within what you have in common goals, common values, common understandings, right? And in that way, you might not, have marching orders by the end of your first conversation of what you're going to do together, but you've certainly started to build a collaborative allyship that can lead to solutions you both support and can bring resources to, right? So the idea of, I'm all nervous, I haven't really dared to get into the weeds with my representatives before, and I have thoughts, is keep them quiet until you're really clear on their thoughts. And you've identified what you love about what they're bringing to this shared problem. And then gift them with that love, that you agree with them, that in fact maybe you have some resources to throw towards what they're doing. People you know, insights you have, whatever, right? And then you can also frame with that same commonality what more you have to bring to this shared goal. We share so much more than we differ on. But we live in a social world which is focusing on the differences. In fact, our nature is to focus on the differences because that's where we're going to find things that need our work. But before we can do the work productively, we need to build the commonalities, build that community connection, realize what we have in common, and invest in that part of the conversation too. It's a much more pleasant conversation and a much more productive one. So that's my interpretation of what I learned from Katharine Hayhoe, and I hope you find it helpful. The listener who I chatted with seemed to, so there you go. See you next week.